Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trauma Recovery Coaching Summit, sponsored by the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaching. I'm Bobby Parrish, the Executive Director of the association.
And hi, I'm Sarah Parrish, the Deputy Director.
We are so happy to have you here for 5 days of interviews with our coaches about trauma, trauma recovery coaching. We do, though, want to issue you a trigger warning. Some of the things that we'll be discussing can be triggering for some people. So make sure and practice your best self-care skills while you're listening to the videos.
Thanks, Bobby. So today we have the absolute honour and pleasure in interviewing and welcoming Manyi Ebot. Today, Manyi is here to talk to us about self-compassion in trauma survivors. Hi, Manyi, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Sarah.
Good. It's an absolute pleasure and honour to have you here with us today. So, Manyi, can you just explain to us, what does self-compassion mean to you?
To answer the question, what self-compassion means to me, I'll tell you a little story because I love to tell stories.
Yes.
A few years ago, I walked into a room of people and noticed that everything seemed normal. There were three people in a corner chatting. One person's head was buried in the phone, maybe typing a text message. And another person at another corner of the room was looking at the computer, possibly watching a YouTube video. But then as I glazed through the room, I noticed a lady sitting by herself and she had silent tears coming down her face. So instantly I could tell she was suffering in some ways. I decided to move close to her to see if there's any way I could help. But as I was walking towards her, I heard a monologue in my head saying, "What makes you think she'll want to listen to you?" Or, "You're not good enough to handle this situation." Or, "You might end up making her more uncomfortable." So to me, compassion is the concern we feel for the sufferings of other people, and we are motivated to relieve that suffering. But that person's suffering could also be you. And this is where self-compassion comes in. It is when we notice our own sufferings and we are motivated to relieve ourselves from that suffering. Yeah.
So when you say someone is suffering, do you identify with that, Manyi, in terms of your own trauma experience and what you went through?
Yes, I identify with that from my own experience, which I intend to talk more in the course of my presentation. Yeah.
Okay, so what's the transformation process between suffering to the solution, which is self-compassion?
To me, the transformation process is what I call a three-step process. The first step is awareness. The second step is the approach. And the third step is action. So we have to be aware, like I was aware of the lady's sufferings, and I was motivated to help relieve it if she let me do it. But then I needed an approach to do that.
Okay.
And also I had to take action, because if just like with self-compassion, if I'm aware of my own sufferings, and I know the approach to take, but I do not take the action, then it doesn't really end up in self-compassion. So there has to be an awareness, an approach, and actions that we need to take. So this is one of the reasons why self-compassion is so important, because we have to help ourselves first in order to help others.
Okay.
From my perspective, yeah.
Yeah. So kind of like on the airplane, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help those with you?
Yes, kind of like that. And also with awareness, I noticed from my own experience with trauma, as human beings, there are so many ways we are not being kind to ourselves. And irrespective of the so many reasons we might give for that, it all boils down to the inner critic and self-blame. So self-awareness gives us the opportunity to understand our own strength, our weaknesses and our beliefs, our motivation and emotions, so we can be conscious of how we are not being kind to ourselves and what we can do to find a solution to it.
Yeah. In what ways can we, like, you said about this as self-critic and things like that, in what ways can we identify the self-critic in us?
Okay, so the inner critic is the voice within us which judges and demeans us. And sometimes, well, some time ago I heard someone said, tell the negative committee that meets in your head to sit down and shut up. But life would be so interesting if we could just tell that committee to be quiet and shut up and sit down. But sadly, it doesn't always happen that way. So a lot of our suffering, which comes from the conversation in our mind, is revealed through the words we speak to ourselves. We often talk of the inner critic, but our inner conversation is not always negative, or it's not always critical. Sometimes it could be positive and encouraging, like it could say, keep going, you're doing a good job, or you can do it. And although we have these inner voices, they become unhealthy when they are very strong, or they move and run our life in a negative direction which we do not want it to go. So that's when it becomes the inner critic. These voices, they have been formed over a period of time from previous experiences, what happened in our lives, like our traumatic experiences. I believe they are born during our trauma as a way of protecting us. But the meaning we attach to the event, and the meaning we attach to the events, like how we think about what we went through and what we can do about it. Like I said, it originates from our experiences, and also how the authority figures in our life reacted to what we went through and the meaning we got out of their reactions. For example, you and me can have the same experiences, but if the authority figure reacts to it differently, it will affect you. It will give birth to a different voice within you. The voices might make you happy, while mine might make me angry. So to me, that's when the inner critic is born. But to explain more about the inner critic, I like to use the 7 types of inner critic as recognized by Dr. J. Early and Bonnie West in their book, Freedom from the Inner Critic. So they talked about 7 types of inner critic. The first is a perfectionist. And the perfectionist is the one who tries to get us to do things perfectly, to look perfect, to be perfect. It sets high standards so that it should not prevent us from not meeting up to expectations. So it can also prevent us from taking actions, because it won't want us to do something unless we are certain that we are going to do it perfectly. So someone without this critic might understand that they don't have to be perfect. They just have to make progress, just have to do the best they can in the moment. But this critic conceals progress with perfection. Yeah. And the second kind of inner critic they pointed out is the controller. And this critic wants to control every impulse. Our eating, our drinking, our talking, our walking. So it tells us you are not doing it well enough, you are not doing it fast enough, because it doesn't want us to be out of control at any moment. Its intention is for us to be a good person who is accepted and functions well in society. So it wants us to do things in a specific manner. So this critic is very cautious. It leaves no room for exploring. It wants us to follow a set pattern. So that's the second kind of inner critic they pointed out. The third is a taskmaster. And this is the workaholic critic, the one who wants us to work harder and never take any time off for ourselves. Yeah, it fears that we may be mediocre or lazy, or will be judged as a failure if it doesn't keep pushing us to keep going. So it pushes us to do more and to accomplish more, and in order to be accepted or to be noticed. And like all these give birth to the sufferings we have internally, and these are all why we need to practice self-compassion. So the fourth is the underminer. So this critic tells us that failure is inevitable. So it diminishes our self-confidence to take any action, and also our self-esteem. So we cannot take any kind of risk. It is afraid that we are putting ourselves in situations where we can fail. So it attacks us in order not to take any chances. Then the fifth one they pointed out is the destroyer. And this critic attacks our self-worth. It makes us believe that we do not deserve to exist, and it leads us to harsh self-hatred. So it makes us feel awful about ourselves, and we feel we are not entitled to love or respect. And the sixth one is a guilt tripper. This critic, it helps us, it may have helped us at a time in our life, but as we practice self-compassion, which we'll talk about later, realize that it might not be serving us anymore. So this critic, it keeps us in the past and makes it difficult for us to forgive ourselves for wrongs we may have done or for the people who hurt us. And it's also the critic which will tell us that we have made a mistake, which will tell us, it will not say we have made a mistake, but rather it will say we are a mistake.
Huge difference.
Yeah. And the seventh one, which is the last inner critic they pointed out, is the molder. So this is I call it the people-pleasing critic, because it tries to get us to fit into a certain mold based on standards held by society, by culture, or by our family. It wants us to be liked and to be admired in order to protect us from being abandoned, or from being shamed, or from being rejected. So the molder makes us do things to fit in. But in the process of that, it might cause a disconnect between who we are and who others want us to be. And I can totally relate to this, because I know after the trauma I experienced, I was very much a people pleaser, because I felt if I could do things well enough, I might work my way back into the hearts of people, or I might be accepted to fit in when I was once told I do not fit in. Yeah. So those are the 7 kind of inner critics they pointed out.
Yeah. As you talked about those, Manyi, I'm like, oh, yeah, I have that one. Oh, I know that one. Oh, I have that one. I'm not sure there was a category that you brought up that I was able to say, no, I don't have that.
Yeah, I think I was ticking all the boxes as well. I was going, yeah, tick, 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 tick. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I was also very, very much drawn into their work, because I could really see myself in almost all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we approach self-blame?
Yeah, well, before going to the approach on self-blame, let me talk about the approach to the inner critic, because, okay. So we can approach the inner critic, first of all, by listening from the point of the observer and not judgment. Because to me, in my own experience, I always felt like each time the inner critic talks to me, I felt like it is judging me. I didn't listen to it. So it was more like a battlefield. But I think, first of all, we should approach the inner critic from a position of the observer. So that way we can realize that those are thoughts in our mind, and it is not dictating to us, but rather it is simply making a point. And when we are the listener, after listening to its point, we can pick out the truth from it, from the lies. And also, because the inner critic was born at the time of trauma, so it may have been a coping mechanism, but then we approach it from the position of, does this still serve me? Is this a coping mechanism I still want to keep, or is it something I want to change to adapt to a better coping mechanism? So I think that is the best approach with me. That's the best way I approach the inner critic. And like you mentioned, the second thing that keeps us suffering internally is self-blame. And this is very disturbing too, because it was also a result of our traumatic experiences. We often have the thoughts like, I didn't think fast enough when that happened to me. or I am not beautiful. If I was beautiful, this would not have been done to me, or I never do anything right, or I am unworthy, nobody loves me, it is all my fault. We find out that we find that we blame ourselves in some ways for the things that happen to us. When these thoughts come repeatedly to our mind, and when we even go further to say it, it becomes our reality, not because it is the truth, but because we have believed it, and it is no longer the lie it used to be. It has now become more like a truth. So within each of us, we somehow blame ourselves for the abuse in some way. Like for me, when I was sexually abused, I thought, well, why did I go out at that time? Maybe if I didn't go out at that time, this would not have happened to me. So that's one of the self-blame which I suffered from. So in order to be compassionate towards ourselves, we have to acknowledge that those are just thoughts. And like I said earlier, those thoughts can be changed. And that's why I brought up this approach to self-blame. So this is a process of changing the thoughts. The first approach I use is to distinguish between taking responsibility and self-blame. Because very often as trauma survivors, we hear a lot of messages out there which says take responsibility. But then when we take responsibility, does that mean I am to blame for the abuse? So the first approach is to distinguish what does taking responsibility mean and what does self-blame mean. So to me, taking responsibility is, how can I move on from this point onward? I may not have been responsible for what happened to me. It may not have been my fault, but how do I move on from this position to where I want to be? That is the way I look at taking responsibility. While self-blame, on the other hand, is saying, this is my fault. It keeps me looking back. Well, I can say in summary, self-blame keeps me looking in the past, while taking responsibility keeps me looking towards the future.
Yes, that makes so much sense. And,
yeah, and it's, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the second approach I use is, well, there are three approaches. The second one is to forgive yourself. Yeah, because personally in my case, I felt like I withheld forgiveness from myself a lot. I tormented myself so much for the things I was telling myself would not have happened if I had done things differently. So for example, you could be telling yourself, it would not have happened if I didn't leave the house at that time, just like I said. So I blame myself for going out. Or you could be telling yourself, I would not have been tortured or abandoned if I wasn't born. So we tend to blame ourselves for being born into the world. Although those are really not things we could have controlled. But, another one which I totally relate to is, I blame myself for not speaking out about the abuse earlier. Like in my case, I didn't tell my family about what happened to me when I was below the age of 10 until I was in my early 20s. So I blame myself a lot for keeping silent about the abuse. And I was constantly worried and stressed because of the secret within me. So the more I thought of it, the more it made me angry and stressed, and the more I felt stuck. And also I could feel like, well, not really, I could feel like I actually did experience about, let me say, maybe at the time I have about 3 characters in my mind arguing, and they were really angry. And sometimes by the time they are done with their argument, I have a headache because they're all making their points on reasons why they are angry. And when I walked my recovery journey, I realized the more that I could stand, it became conscious to me that those voices are parts of myself which I haven't forgiven. Because when I listen to them and I learn to forgive them, then it diminished the anger in their voices, because I felt like, okay, they felt like now they have finally listened to their plight, and I've forgiven those parts of myself. So that's why I think forgiving ourselves is very important. But often we try to resolve conflict with other people, and fail to resolve the conflict within our own self. So if we truly want to resolve a conflict, I believe it has to start with us, because somewhere within us, like I mentioned, there's a reason we blame ourselves. Even if it is imaginary, even if it is imaginary, imaginary reason, but there is still that reason that we blame ourselves, and it will not take our mind out of our role in it, although we think it is imaginary or real. So in resolving the conflict, we first identify the part where we think we are at fault, and then forgive ourselves for it, so we can let go of the pain. Yeah. And then the third part is to examine our beliefs, to pick out the lies from the truth.
Okay.
Because most of our beliefs were ingrained in us in early childhood and in different stages in our life. And some of those beliefs, they might be empowering and they help us to be kind to ourselves. But other beliefs are negative and they limit our capabilities. For example, if we act in a certain way, we believe, if we act in a certain way based on our beliefs, we tend to treat like if we act in a certain way, we tend to believe that that is the way it will always turn out.
Yes.
So yeah, so we tend to believe that's the way it will always turn out. So we might even end up withholding grace from ourselves, because we are like, okay, if I do this in this way, it's going to turn out this way. We do not allow room for grace. We just want it to be in a certain way. So, but it is really not our fault, because those things came as a result of our beliefs, which we have acquired for a very long time. And like I read a while ago, it says most of our habits are 90% unconscious. So those beliefs are mostly from our unconscious habits, from our unconscious self. So when we want to practice self-compassion, I believe we have to sit down and examine most of our beliefs and say, okay, is this true or is this a lie? Then we can be able to fully express self-compassion to ourselves.
Yeah. So is this a process that you go through with your clients, Manyi?
Yes, I've used it for myself and with some of my clients too. I always give them the opportunity to examine their beliefs, yes, and also to examine their coping mechanism. And I also want them to look within themselves, to be conscious if there are areas where they need to forgive themselves. Because for me, I was raised in a household of faith. So it was very easy for me to forgive the people who hurt me, because I had learned about forgiving others even before the abuse took place. But nobody ever taught me how to forgive myself. So within me, I was so quick to forgive them. But then I kept blaming myself. I kept saying, okay, this is my fault. This is my fault in this way, because I thought, okay, I had to forgive them to let go of it. But then I was still suffering. I was not compassionate to myself, because I was compassionate towards them. That's why I forgive them. But I was not compassionate to myself. So I believe we also have to practice that. That's why I let my clients have the opportunity to examine where they need to offer forgiveness to themselves.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So, Manyi, if people are listening to this and they want to know how to get in touch with you, how do they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me through my Instagram, which is Manyi Ebot, MANYIEBOT, and my Facebook is the same, Manyi Ebot, and my website is Manuel Connections. So Manuel, MANUEL, and then connections.com.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay, and
thank you. And I just want to say today, just to say thank you to all our listeners who've come along today and listened to our interview with Manyi. Thank you so much, Manyi, for bringing this important topic up, sort of thing, to everybody. We have so many more interviews and more videos for everyone to watch. But until then, we hope you all take care and we see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.